The Zenthri Imperium had conquered 47 star systems in less than 3 standard years, and High Commander Vex Thor believed the 48th would fall within the week. Standing aboard the bridge of the Imperial warship Dominance, he gazed at the holographic display showing the small human colony world of Threshold Prime, a modest settlement on the very edge of what humanity audaciously called their territory. The planet held no strategic value, possessed no rare resources, and housed barely 200,000 souls, yet Vex Thor had chosen it specifically for those reasons. When crushing an opponent, one begins with their weakest holdings, demonstrating the futility of resistance before moving inward toward their core worlds. The Zenthri had perfected this strategy over centuries of expansion, and the humans, these strange bipedal creatures who had only achieved faster-than-light travel 2 generations ago, would learn the same lessons that dozens of species before them had learned. Resistance was pointless. Surrender was inevitable. The strong consumed the weak, as the universe had always intended. Vex Thor's secondary arms clasped behind his back as his primary arms gestured toward the tactical officer. Status of the invasion fleet? His voice carried the clicking harmonics of the Zenthri language, translated instantly by the ship's communication systems. The tactical officer, a younger warrior named Kelshan, manipulated the holographic controls with practiced efficiency. All 300 vessels are in position, High Commander. Our battle cruisers form the primary attack wave, with support frigates and troop carriers in secondary formation. Preliminary scans indicate minimal defensive capabilities on the surface. They possess perhaps 24 outdated orbital defense platforms and a small garrison of what they call Marines. Kelshan's mandibles clicked in what passed for Zenthri amusement. Their largest vessel is a cargo hauler they have retrofitted with projectile weapons. It appears they call it the Steadfast. Intelligence suggests it is captained by a human named Chen, a former merchant who has no formal military training. The bridge crew shared in the moment of derision. The Zenthri were a warrior species, bred and trained for combat from the moment they hatched. The concept of a merchant playing at being a military commander seemed almost tragically comical. Vex Thor allowed himself a rare expression of satisfaction, his crest rising slightly. Open a communication channel to the planet. Let us offer them the standard terms. If they surrender immediately and accept Imperium rule, we will permit them to continue their existence as a subject species. If they resist, we will demonstrate why resistance is inadvisable. The communications officer worked her console, and within moments, a connection was established with the planetary governor's office on Threshold Prime. The holographic display shimmered and resolved into the image of a human female, middle-aged by their standards, with graying hair pulled back in a severe style and eyes that held an unexpected steadiness. This is Governor Sarah Hendricks of Threshold Prime. I assume you're here to threaten us. Her voice carried neither fear nor aggression, merely a tired resignation that momentarily puzzled Vex Thor. He had expected panic or bravado, the 2 most common responses from species facing Zenthri conquest. This weary acceptance was something different. I am High Commander Vex Thor of the Zenthri Imperium, he began, launching into the speech he had delivered dozens of times before. Your world now falls within territory claimed by the Imperium. You have 12 standard hours to surrender unconditionally. Disable your defense platforms, ground all vessels, and prepare to accept Imperium governance. If you comply, your people will be integrated as subjects with standard labor obligations. If you resist, we will take your world by force and your people will face significantly less favorable conditions. These are the only terms. There will be no negotiation. Governor Hendricks listened without interruption, and when Vex Thor finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It was not a happy expression, but rather something that might be worn by someone who had just heard a joke they had been expecting. High Commander, I appreciate your honesty, and I'm going to return the courtesy. We received word 3 days ago that you were heading our way. We've evacuated all non-essential personnel, mostly children and elderly, to the underground shelters we built specifically for this possibility. Everyone who remains is here by choice, and we've made our decision. Threshold Prime stands. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes meeting Vex Thor's across the light years. I've sent a message to Earth and the inner colonies. Help is coming. My job is to make sure we're still here when it arrives. So, High Commander, you have your terms, and here are ours. Turn your fleet around and leave human space. This is your only warning. The bridge of the Dominants erupted in clicking laughter. Even Vex Thor, who prided himself on his professional composure, could not suppress the rising of his crest in amusement. This human, this governor of an insignificant colony, was issuing warnings to the Zenthari Imperium. It was like watching a small insect threaten a predator. Admirably brave perhaps, but ultimately futile and slightly pathetic. Governor Hendricks, Vex Thor said once the laughter had subsided, I have 300 warships. You have 24 obsolete defense platforms and a converted cargo vessel. Help from your inner colonies, even if it were coming, would take weeks to arrive. You will not last 12 hours once we begin our assault. I urge you to reconsider. Bravery is admirable, but suicide is simply wasteful. That's where you're wrong, Commander, Hendricks replied, and now there was something else in her expression, something that Vex Thor could not quite identify. Help isn't weeks away. In fact, it's closer than you think. You've made a fundamental mistake in your understanding of humanity. We've only had faster-than-light travel for 2 generations, that's true. But we've been fighting each other for our entire existence. We've perfected warfare in ways you cannot imagine. We've fought with sticks and stones, with swords and shields, with guns and bombs, with nuclear fire and bioweapons that could sterilize worlds. We've committed atrocities that would make your conquest look gentle, and we've learned from every single one. We've spent the last 50 years terrified that we'd finally destroyed ourselves. Then we reached the stars and discovered we weren't alone, and you know what that taught us? She paused, and Vex Thor found himself waiting for the answer despite himself. It taught us that all that violence, all that innovation in killing, could finally be directed outward instead of inward. So thank you, High Commander. Thank you for giving humanity a common enemy. Before Vex Thor could respond, Governor Hendricks terminated the connection. The holographic display flickered and went dark, leaving the bridge in a moment of uncertain silence. Vex Thor turned to his tactical officer. Analysis. Is there any indication of additional human forces in the system? Kelshawn worked his console, running deep scans across all frequencies. Negative, High Commander. Long-range sensors detect nothing beyond the expected defense platforms and the retrofitted cargo vessel. No ships approaching through conventional space or emerging from faster-than-light corridors. If reinforcements are coming, they are not yet within our detection range. Vex Thor nodded slowly. It was as he expected. The governor was bluffing, attempting to buy time with psychological warfare. It was a tactic the Zenthari had encountered before from desperate opponents. Maintain sensor sweeps, but proceed with the invasion as planned. All ships to battle stations. We will demonstrate the price of human defiance. The Zenthari fleet moved with practiced precision, spreading into attack formation as they approached Threshold Prime. The planet hung in space like a blue and green jewel, deceptively peaceful from this distance. Vex Thor watched as his forward cruisers locked targeting solutions on the orbital defense platforms, old-style railgun emplacements that were outdated by at least 2 generations of weapons technology. The battle would be brief and decisive, a message to humanity that their brief time among the stars was about to end under Zenthari dominion. All forward batteries, target the defense platforms. Weapons free on my command, Vex Thor ordered. The weapons officers confirmed their readiness, and Vex Thor was about to give the final order when every console on the bridge suddenly flared with warning indicators. High Commander. The sensor operator's voice carried an edge of confusion. "I'm detecting massive spatial distortions, bearing 270, distance 300,000 kilometers. Multiple emergence signatures, configuration unknown. They're coming in fast." Vextor's attention snapped to the sensor display. The spatial distortions were unlike anything in the Zen3 database. Human faster-than-light travel utilized jump gates and established corridors, creating predictable emergence signatures. These distortions were different, almost as if something was tearing holes directly into normal space. "How many ships?" Vextor demanded. The sensor operator's mandibles clicked nervously. "Reading is unclear, High Commander. The distortions are interfering with our scans. Estimate at least 50 contacts, possibly more. Wait, the signatures are resolving. Visual confirmation incoming." The main view screen shifted to show the region of space where the distortions were occurring, and Vextor felt something he had not experienced in many years: genuine uncertainty. The ships that emerged from the spatial tears were black, not the black of paint or hull material, but a black that seemed to absorb light itself. They were angular and aggressive in design, bristling with weapon arrays that even from this distance looked formidable. Unlike the standardized ships of the Zen3 fleet, each human vessel seemed unique, varying in size from frigate class to massive dreadnoughts that rivaled the dominance itself. And they were not moving in the cautious, probing manner of a fleet entering a combat zone. They were accelerating at attack speed, heading directly for the Zen3 formation. "Tactical analysis," Vextor ordered, forcing his voice to remain steady. Kelshawn worked frantically at his console, pulling data as fast as the sensors could provide it. "High Commander, the vessels are not matching any known human ship configurations in our database. Their power signatures are significantly higher than expected for ships of their size. I'm detecting energy readings consistent with weapon systems, but the configuration is unknown. They're also jamming our deep scans, so I cannot provide accurate counts of their numbers. Visual tracking suggests at least 70 ships, possibly as many as 100. The tactical officer looked up from his console, his crest lowered in concern. "High Commander, their lead vessels are broadcasting on all frequencies. Audio only." "Put it through," Vextor commanded. The bridge speakers crackled to life with a transmission, and a human voice filled the space, deep and carrying the kind of calm that came not from peace but from absolute certainty of purpose. "Zen3 Fleet, this is Admiral James Hawking of the Terran Defense Force Black Fleet. You have entered human territory and threatened human lives. You have been warned to leave. You did not listen. This is not a negotiation. This is not a battle. This is an extermination. You have 30 seconds to begin emergency jumps out of this system. Any ship remaining after that deadline will be destroyed. The count begins now." The bridge of the dominance erupted in angry clicking and aggressive posturing. The idea that these humans, these newcomers to galactic civilization, would threaten the Zen3 Imperium was beyond insulting. Vextor felt his own battle rage rising, the ancient instinct that had driven his species to conquer dozens of worlds. "All ships, battle formation Delta. Target the human vessels. Show them the price of arrogance. Fire at will." The Zen3 fleet, 300 strong and representing the pride of the Imperium, opened fire. Energy beams lanced across the void, powerful enough to crack planets and boil atmospheres. The Zen3 had refined their weapons over centuries of warfare, and the concentrated fire of 300 warships should have been enough to vaporize the human fleet in the opening salvo. The black ships moved. Not with the ponderous maneuvering of traditional capital ships, but with an agility that seemed to defy their size. They scattered and wove through the incoming fire, their black holes seeming to bend light around them in ways that made targeting difficult. A few shots connected, and Vextor expected to see the satisfying explosions of human vessels destroyed. Instead, The energy beams dissipated against shielding technology that blazed briefly with absorbed energy before channeling it away into the void. These were not the shields of a species new to space warfare. These were barriers that spoke of advanced understanding of energy dynamics and defensive systems. Then the human fleet returned fire, and Vextor understood that Governor Hendricks had not been bluffing. The black ships unleashed weapons that the Zenthari had never encountered. Railguns that fired projectiles at relativistic speeds, each round carrying the kinetic energy of small nuclear weapons. Energy weapons that pulsed in frequencies that seemed specifically designed to overload Zenthari shielding. And missiles, thousands of missiles, that moved with intelligent guidance systems and carried warheads that burned with fusion fire. The forward elements of the Zenthari fleet, 12 battle cruisers that had led countless successful invasions, simply ceased to exist in the first 30 seconds of engagement. They did not explode dramatically or burn slowly. They were hit by such overwhelming force that they were reduced to expanding clouds of debris and vapor. Evasive maneuvers. All ships break formation and engage independently. Vextor shouted over the chaos of the bridge. Warning klaxons blared as the Dominance shuddered under impacts against its shields. The mighty flagship, which had never taken significant damage in any engagement, was being battered by human weapons that treated its defenses as mere inconveniences. Kelshawn looked up from his tactical console, his crest completely flattened in fear. "High Commander, we have lost 47 ships in the first engagement. The human vessels are coordinating their attacks with precision we cannot match. Their targeting systems are predicting our movements and compensating faster than we can react. I recommend immediate retreat." Vextor's pride warred with his survival instinct. The Zenthari did not retreat. The Zenthari did not flee from inferior species. But as he watched another wave of his ships die, consumed by human firepower, he realized that these were not an inferior species. These were predators, just like the Zenthari, except they had been refining their predatory instincts on each other for thousands of years before reaching the stars. All ships, emergency jump, scatter protocol. Retreat to the rally point at, his order was cut short as the Dominance rocked under a massive impact. The main view screen showed one of the human dreadnoughts, a massive vessel that dwarfed even the Dominance, bearing down on them at impossible speed. "That's the flagship," the sensor operator reported, his voice breaking with stress. Designation reading as TDF Retribution. "High Commander, its main guns are charging. Energy readings are off the scale." Vextor made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, assuming he survived the next few minutes. Full power to rear shields. Emergency jump, now. Abandon formation. The Dominance's faster-than-light drives engaged in an emergency sequence, tearing a hole in space without the usual careful calculations. It was dangerous and could result in the ship emerging anywhere within a dozen light years, but it was better than staying in range of that human dreadnought. The last thing Vextor saw before the jump took them was the Retribution firing its main cannons, and dozens more Zenthari ships disappearing in silent blooms of destruction. The Dominance emerged from its emergency jump in empty space, systems screaming warnings about hull stress and drive damage. Vextor pulled himself up from where the violent jump had thrown him against his command chair. Around the bridge, officers were picking themselves up and trying to restore order to their stations. Damage report. Ship count. Where are we? The questions came rapid fire as Vextor's training overrode his shock. The engineering officer checked her systems, her mandibles clicking with distress. Multiple hull breaches on deck 7 through 12. Shields at 30% capacity. Main weapons offline. Faster-than-light drive needs at least 6 hours for safe usage. We are approximately 8 light-years from Threshold Prime, in uncharted space. Ship count? Vextor repeated. Kelshawn worked his console, running scans for Zenthari transponder signals. When he looked up, his eyes held a defeated emptiness. "High Commander, I am detecting 43 Zenthari vessels within communication range. All show significant damage. Many are reporting casualties and disabled systems." The implication hung in the air like a toxic gas. Of the 300 ships that had entered the Threshold Prime system with such confidence, only 43 had escaped. The Zenthari Imperium, which had conquered 47 star systems without significant opposition, had just lost over 85% of an invasion fleet to a human force that had appeared out of nowhere. Vextor stood silent for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the disaster. Then his training reasserted itself. Open communications with all surviving ships. Form a defensive perimeter. Get our sensors working at maximum range. If the humans followed us, I want to know immediately. As the crew scrambled to follow orders, Vextor accessed the communication logs from the battle, reviewing the transmission from the human admiral. Black Fleet, the human had called it. Not the main Terran Defense Force, but a specific fleet designated by color. Which implied there were other fleets. Other forces that humanity had prepared in secret while the Zenthari had assumed they were a weak, scattered species. The invasion of human territory had been intended as the opening move in the conquest of a new species. Instead, it had revealed that the Zenthari had gravely underestimated their opponent. On Threshold Prime, Governor Sarah Hendricks stood in the command center, watching the orbital displays as the Zenthari fleet fled and the Black Fleet held position around her world. The defense platforms were still operational, the Steadfast was still ready, and her people were safe in their shelters. The communication console chirped, and she accepted the incoming transmission. Admiral Hawking's face appeared on the screen, showing a weathered man with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. Governor Hendricks, the system is secure. The Zenthari won't be back, at least not soon. We'll maintain a presence here until reinforcements from the Third Fleet arrive. Admiral, thank you, Hendricks said, feeling the tension that had sustained her for the last 3 days finally beginning to release. When you said help was close, I didn't realize you meant this close. How did you get here so fast? Hawking's expression showed a grim satisfaction. We've been running dark patrols along the border for 8 months, Governor. Ever since intelligence suggested the Zenthari were expanding in this direction. The Black Fleet is designed for rapid response to exactly this kind of incursion. We've been equipped with experimental jump drives that don't require gates or corridors. More expensive, harder to maintain, but they let us be where we're needed when we're needed. He leaned back slightly. Earth Command wanted to keep our capabilities secret as long as possible, let potential enemies underestimate us. But the moment the Zenthari crossed into human space, the secrecy became secondary to showing them that humanity is not prey. Hendricks nodded, understanding the larger strategy. Humanity had learned hard lessons in its violent history, and one of those lessons was that predators respected strength. What happens now, Admiral? Hawking's expression turned serious. Now we wait and see if the Zenthari are smart enough to recognize what happened here. We hurt them badly, but we didn't destroy them completely. Some of their fleet escaped, which means they'll report back to their Imperium. The question is whether their leadership will recognize that humanity is not worth the cost of conquest, or whether they'll escalate. He paused, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. And if they escalate, Governor, then the Black Fleet will visit their worlds and show them what humanity learned from thousands of years of perfecting warfare. We didn't claw our way to the stars just to bow to the first alien empire that threatened us. As the transmission ended, Hendricks looked out at the stars, where the black ships maintained their protective vigil around her world. Humanity had been tested, and humanity had answered with overwhelming force. The galaxy, she suspected, was about to learn a lesson that humans had taught each other countless times throughout their bloody history. There were things worth fighting for, and when pushed, humans did not break. They fought back with every ounce of violence and ingenuity they possessed, and they did not stop until their enemies understood that some prey had teeth and claws of their own. The Zenthari High Council chamber on the imperial homeworld of Zenth Prime was a monument to conquest, its walls carved from the stone of 100 subjugated worlds and decorated with the banners of defeated species. High Commander Vextor stood in the center of that chamber, his crest lowered in submission, as the 7 members of the council regarded him with expressions ranging from disbelief to barely contained rage. Supreme Counselor Rakstar, eldest of the council and veteran of more campaigns than any living Zenthari, sat in the central throne, his 4 arms crossed in a gesture that signified profound disappointment. The silence stretched for a long moment before Rakstar finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority that had guided the Imperium for 3 decades. High Commander Vextor, you departed for human territory with 300 ships, representing a significant portion of our expeditionary forces. You assured this council that the conquest of the human frontier would be accomplished within 1 lunar cycle, establishing a foothold from which we could expand into their territory. Rakstar leaned forward, his eyes locked on Vextor with an intensity that made even the battle-hardened commander resist the urge to step backward. You return with 43 damaged vessels, casualties numbering in the tens of thousands, and a report that strains credibility. Explain to this council how the most catastrophic military defeat in Zenthari history occurred at the hands of a species that has possessed faster-than-light capability for barely 50 of their years. Vextor straightened, knowing that his life and honor depended on his response. Supreme Counselor, honored council members, I take full responsibility for underestimating the human threat. Our intelligence indicated a scattered species with minimal military coordination and outdated technology. This intelligence was catastrophically incorrect. He activated a holographic projector, displaying the recorded footage from the Battle of Threshold Prime. The council members watched in silence as the black ships emerged and systematically destroyed the Zenthari fleet with weapons and tactics that spoke of advanced military sophistication. The humans deployed a fleet they call the Black Fleet, equipped with jump technology that does not match any known faster-than-light system. They emerged directly into combat range without the navigational beacons or jump gates that our intelligence suggested were necessary for human space travel. Counselor Mirkan, the youngest member of the council and the most aggressive advocate for expansion, clicked his mandibles in frustration. Technology can be stolen or purchased from other species. The galaxy contains many civilizations willing to sell advanced systems to primitive worlds with sufficient currency. Perhaps the humans simply bought their capabilities from the Arkelian Consortia or the Vaxian technocracy. Vextor had anticipated this argument. I consider that possibility, Counselor. However, the weapons systems and tactical coordination demonstrated by the human fleet do not match Arkelian or Vaxian design philosophy. Moreover, our surviving sensor logs show that the human ships were utilizing weapons that appear designed specifically to counter Zenthari shielding frequencies and armor composition. The targeting solutions they employed predicted our evasive maneuvers with accuracy that suggests detailed study of Zenthari combat doctrine. Are you suggesting the humans have been preparing specifically to fight us? Rakstar asked, his tone sharp. Vextor nodded slowly. Supreme Counselor, I believe the humans have been observing our expansion for some time. They allowed us to believe they were weak and disorganized while they prepared defensive forces specifically calibrated to counter our advantages. This is not the behavior of a primitive species. This is the behavior of a sophisticated military intelligence apparatus. He paused, knowing his next words would be controversial. I believe we should cease expansion into human territory and focus our efforts on consolidating our existing holdings. The humans have demonstrated both capability and will to defend their space. Further conflict will be costly. The council chamber erupted in clicking and aggressive posturing. The concept of backing down from a weaker species was anathema to Zenthari culture. Counselor Vexnar, master of the Imperial Warforges, rose to his full height, his crest raised in challenge. High Commander, you suggest we allow this defeat to stand unanswered? That we permit a species of primitives to humiliate the Imperium and face no consequences? If we retreat now, every species in this sector will see it as weakness. Our subject worlds will revolt. Our enemies will be emboldened. The cost of appearing weak is far greater than the cost of war. The other counselors clicked their agreement, and Vextor felt the political tide turning against him. Supreme Counselor Rakstar raised a primary hand for silence, and the chamber quieted. High Commander Vextor, your counsel is noted and your honesty is appreciated. However, Counselor Vexnar speaks truth. The Imperium cannot afford to appear weak. We will not cease our expansion, but we will modify our approach. He turned to address the full council. I propose we issue a formal declaration of war against humanity. We will mobilize not a single expeditionary fleet, but 3 full battle fleets, totaling over 1,000 warships. We will not strike at their frontier colonies, but at Earth itself, their homeworld. We will demonstrate that attacking the Zenthari carries consequences beyond their imagination. Vexthor felt his blood chill despite the warm chamber. Supreme Counselor, with respect, we do not have complete intelligence on human defensive capabilities. The Black Fleet may represent only a fraction of their military forces. An assault on Earth could encounter resistance far beyond what we faced at Threshold Prime. Raxthar's eyes narrowed. Then we shall gather intelligence, High Commander. You will lead a reconnaissance force to human space. You will identify their military installations, their fleet positions, and their defensive strategies. You will provide this council with the information necessary to plan an overwhelming assault that will break humanity's will to resist. You failed as an invasion commander, but you are still a capable officer. Prove your worth in this assignment, or another will take your place, and you will face trial for the losses you incurred. The dismissal was clear. Vexthor lowered his crest in acknowledgement and withdrew from the chamber, his mind already racing through the implications of the council's decision. The Zenthari were committed to war with humanity, and he had been tasked with gathering the intelligence that would enable that war. As he walked through the corridors of the Imperial Palace, he could not shake the memory of those black ships emerging from nowhere, moving with predatory grace, and destroying his fleet with clinical efficiency. The humans had set a trap at Threshold Prime, and the Zenthari had walked into it with arrogant confidence. Now they were preparing to walk into a potentially larger trap, and Vexthor would be scouting the path. On Earth, in the underground command complex known as Terra Base, Admiral James Hawking stood before a collection of the highest-ranking military and civilian leaders of humanity. The United Earth Coalition had been formed 30 years ago when humanity's various nations and factions realized that a divided species would be vulnerable among the stars. Now that coalition was being tested as never before. President Maria Chen, elected leader of the coalition, studied the tactical display showing the current disposition of human forces across known space. Admiral Hawking, your report indicates that the Zenthari retreat was not a surrender but a strategic withdrawal. Intelligence suggests they are mobilizing additional forces for a larger campaign. That's correct, Madam President, Hawking confirmed, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. Our deep space monitoring stations detected increased military communications traffic in Zenthari space. Signal analysis suggests they are recalling expeditionary forces from their border regions and consolidating them for a major operation. Based on the patterns, we estimate they could field a force of 1,000 or more warships within 3 to 4 months. He pulled up additional data on the holographic display. Furthermore, we have detected what appear to be scout ships probing our outer territories. They are being more cautious now, running passive sensor sweeps and avoiding direct contact. They are learning. General Marcus Stone, commander of Earth's ground forces, leaned forward. Admiral, the Black Fleet performed beyond expectations at Threshold Prime, but even with our technological advantages, can we hold against a force 3 times larger than what you faced? Hawking considered the question carefully. General, the Black Fleet consists of 78 ships currently operational, with another 30 under construction in the hidden shipyards at Titan Station. Our conventional defense fleets add approximately 200 vessels of varying capabilities. In a direct engagement against 1,000 Zenthari warships, even with our technological edge, the outcome would be uncertain at best. Then we need to ensure we do not face them in a direct engagement, said Dr. Sarah Volkov, the Coalition's chief science advisor and architect of many of the Black Fleet's technological advantages. The Zenthari fight like traditional conquerors. They mass their forces and overwhelm opponents with superior numbers and firepower. They expect their enemies to do the same, to meet them in open battle where numerical superiority decides the outcome. Humanity cannot win that kind of war, not yet. But we do not need to fight that kind of war. She activated her own data display, showing historical records from Earth's military conflicts. Throughout our history, when faced with superior forces, humans have employed asymmetric warfare. We use speed instead of strength, deception instead of direct confrontation. We make the enemy fight on our terms, not theirs. President Chen nodded slowly. You are proposing guerrilla warfare on an interstellar scale. Dr. Volkov smiled. Precisely, Madam President. The Zenthari are expecting us to defend Earth, to mass our forces around our homeworld and core colonies. Instead, we use the Black Fleet's mobility to strike at their supply lines, their outlying bases, their isolated formations. We make them spread their forces to protect their own territory while we control when and where we engage. We turn their numerical advantage into a liability by making them defend too many targets with too few ships in any one location. Admiral Hawking pulled up a star map showing Zenthari territory. We have identified 17 key logistics hubs that support their military operations. These are refueling stations, supply depots, and repair facilities that their fleets depend on for extended campaigns. If we strike at these targets, we force them to either garrison each one, spreading their forces thin, or leave them vulnerable and accept degraded operational capacity. He highlighted several systems on the map. Additionally, we have identified 4 shipyard complexes where they construct their warships. Destroying or damaging these facilities would limit their ability to replace losses and sustain a prolonged campaign. General Stone studied the map with a professional eye. Admiral, these targets are deep in Zenthari territory. Some are dozens of light years behind their front lines. The Black Fleet would need to penetrate their space, conduct operations, and withdraw before their response forces could engage. That requires perfect intelligence and flawless execution. Hawking met the general's gaze. Which is why we have been running covert intelligence operations in Zenthari space for the past 6 months. We have assets in position, monitoring their communications, mapping their fleet movements, and identifying vulnerabilities. The Black Fleet's experimental jump drives give us the mobility to strike anywhere in their territory within hours. We hit them where they are weakest, withdraw before they can respond, and move to the next target. There is significant risk in this strategy, President Chen observed. If we miscalculate or if our intelligence is compromised, the Black Fleet could be caught deep in enemy territory and destroyed. Without the Black Fleet, our defensive capabilities would be severely diminished. Dr. Volkov nodded in acknowledgement. The risk is real, Madam President. But the alternative is to wait for the Zenthari to mass their forces and assault Earth. Our defensive stations and conventional fleets would inflict casualties, but ultimately we would be overwhelmed. The Black Fleet represents our best advantage, mobility and surprise. We must use it aggressively, or we will lose at defending static positions. The room fell silent as President Chen considered the options. Finally, she spoke with the authority of her office. Admiral Hawking, you are authorized to proceed with Operation Phantom Strike. The Black Fleet will conduct raids on Zenthari logistics and industrial targets with the objective of disrupting their ability to sustain a major offensive. Dr. Volkov, continue development of any technologies that can enhance our capabilities or counter Zenthari advantages. General Stone, prepare defensive positions around Earth and the core colonies, but be ready to implement evacuation protocols if necessary. We will fight this war with intelligence and adaptability, using the lessons humanity learned from fighting itself for thousands of years. 3 weeks later, High Commander Vex Thor commanded a small reconnaissance fleet of 12 ships as they approached a human listening post on the edge of human-controlled space. The post, designated Station Echo 7 by human records, was a modest facility with minimal defenses, intended primarily for sensor monitoring rather than combat operations. It was exactly the kind of target that would provide valuable intelligence without risking another catastrophic engagement. Vex Thor had learned caution from his defeat at Threshold Prime, and he approached this mission with careful planning and conservative tactics. His ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at extreme range, running passive sensors to map the station's defenses before committing to an approach. Sensor report, Vex Thor commanded from the bridge of his new flagship, the Vigilance, a smaller but newer vessel than the damaged Dominance. The sensor operator worked her console with practiced efficiency. High Commander, Station Echo 7 matches the configuration in our intelligence reports. Detecting minimal energy signatures consistent with a crew of approximately 50 humans. Defensive armament appears limited to point defense systems, no capital ship-grade weapons. No other vessels in the immediate vicinity. The station appears to be operating on routine protocols with no indication they have detected our presence. Vextor studied the tactical display, his mind running through possible scenarios. The station was isolated and vulnerable, but so had Threshold Prime appeared vulnerable. Before the Black Fleet arrived. Maintain position at current range. Continue passive sensor sweeps. I want to know if there are any ships within response range before we commit to an approach. The fleet held position for 2 hours, sensors mapping every electromagnetic emission from the station and the surrounding space. When Vextor was satisfied that no ambush was imminent, he gave the order to advance. All ships, approach formation beta. Weapons armed but do not target the station unless fired upon. Our objective is intelligence gathering, not destruction. The Zenthari ships move forward, closing to within weapons range of Station Echo 7. Vextor opened a communication channel. Human Station, this is High Commander Vextor of the Zenthari Imperium. Your facility is surrounded and your situation is hopeless. Surrender immediately and you will not be harmed. We seek information, not casualties. There was a long pause before the response came, and when it did, the human voice sounded almost bored. Commander Vextor, this is Station Echo 7. We have been monitoring your approach for the past 2 hours. You should know that your position and ship configurations have been transmitted to Fleet Command. Also, you might want to check your long-range sensors. We are not as alone as you think. Vextor felt a chill run through him even before the sensor operator confirmed the warning. High Commander, detecting massive spatial distortions, multiple vectors, distances varying from 500,000 to 1 million kilometers. They were running in silent mode, using the station's emissions to mask their signatures. I count at least 40 vessels, configuration matching Black Fleet signatures from the Threshold Prime engagement. They are powering weapons and beginning approach vectors. The trap had been sprung again, but this time Vextor had maintained his ships at the edge of faster-than-light jump range specifically for this possibility. All ships, emergency jump, scatter protocol. Execute now. The Zenthari vessels tore holes in space and fled, jumping in different directions to prevent the entire force from being tracked. Vextor's ship emerged in empty space, alone, its sensors sweeping for threats or allies. Slowly, over the next hour, 5 other ships made contact, having jumped to the predetermined rally coordinates. Of the 12 ships that had approached Station Echo 7, only 6 had escaped. The humans had not only anticipated the reconnaissance attempt, they had positioned forces specifically to intercept it. The implications were disturbing. Either human intelligence capabilities were far more sophisticated than believed, or they had somehow compromised Zenthari operational security. Vextor recorded a complete report and transmitted it via secure channels back to Zenth Prime, knowing the Council would not be pleased. The humans were not simply defending their territory. They were actively hunting Zenthari forces and setting traps with deadly efficiency. This was not the behavior of a species fighting desperately for survival. This was the behavior of a species that understood warfare at a fundamental level and was prosecuting it with cold calculation. As his damaged reconnaissance fleet limped back toward Zenthari space, Vextor wondered if the Council would finally understand what he had tried to tell them. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was a predator that had been sharpening its claws for thousands of years. Aboard the Black Fleet dreadnought Retribution, Admiral Hawking reviewed the after-action reports from the Station Echo 7 engagement. 6 Zenthari ships destroyed, 6 escaped. Not a complete victory, but enough to send a message. The escaped ships would report back to their commanders, spreading uncertainty and fear. Every reconnaissance mission would now carry the risk of ambush. Every approach to human space would be shadowed by the possibility of the Black Fleet appearing without warning. Operations, what is the status of our next strike? Hawking asked his operations officer. Commander Lisa Torres pulled up the tactical data. Admiral, Strike Group Beta is in position near the Zenthuri logistics hub at Kepler 7. Intelligence confirms the facility is currently resupplying a 40-ship patrol fleet. Strike Group Alpha is approaching the shipyard complex at Zenthuri System HR-174. Both groups are ready to execute on your command. Hawking studied the star maps, seeing the larger picture of the campaign. Humanity could not match the Zenthuri in numbers or resources, but they could make every Zenthuri military operation uncertain and costly. They could force the enemy to garrison every facility, escort every convoy, and question every sensor reading. Execute both strikes simultaneously. I want the Zenthuri to understand that they are not safe anywhere in their own territory. The orders were transmitted via quantum-encrypted channels to the strike groups, and within minutes, reports began flowing back to the Retribution. Strike Group Beta emerged from faster-than-light travel directly on top of the logistics hub at Kepler 7, catching the resupply operation in progress. Zenthuri ships scrambled to respond, but they were configured for patrol duties, not fleet combat. The Black Fleet ships, purpose-built for rapid strike operations, systematically destroyed the logistics facility and 17 of the 40 patrol ships before jumping away. The entire engagement lasted 11 minutes. Strike Group Alpha's attack on the shipyard complex was equally devastating. The experimental jump drives allowed the human ships to emerge inside the system's defensive perimeter, bypassing the network of sensors and weapon platforms designed to provide early warning. 3 partially constructed Zenthuri cruisers were destroyed in their construction berths, and the primary assembly facility was reduced to wreckage before the system's defense forces could mount an effective response. As the reports came in, Admiral Hawking allowed himself a grim satisfaction. Humanity was teaching the Zenthuri the same lesson that humans had learned countless times throughout their history. Superior numbers meant nothing if you could not bring them to bear at the decisive point. Technology mattered less than how it was employed. And in warfare, the side that controlled the tempo and location of engagements held an enormous advantage regardless of raw strength. Communications, transmit a message to Fleet Command, Hawking ordered. Operation Phantom Strike is proceeding according to plan. The Zenthuri are reacting defensively, pulling ships from offensive operations to protect their infrastructure. Recommend continuing current operational tempo for another 4 weeks, then reassess based on enemy response patterns. On Zenth Prime, Supreme Counselor Rakstar reviewed the flood of reports from across Zenthuri space, each one detailing another human attack, another facility destroyed, another fleet damaged or scattered. In the 3 weeks since authorizing the reconnaissance operations, the Imperium had lost more ships and infrastructure to human raids than it had lost in the entire previous year of expansion. The humans were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to win, and they were doing so with a sophistication that challenged everything the Zenthuri thought they understood about warfare. Counselor Vex Nar stood before the Supreme Counselor, his crest lowered in acknowledgement of the deteriorating situation. Supreme Counselor, our military commanders are requesting permission to recall the offensive fleets being assembled for the assault on Earth. They argue that we must defend our own territory before we can strike at human space. Rakstar considered this carefully. The Zenthuri Imperium had been built on conquest and expansion. To abandon an offensive and turn to defensive operations would signal weakness to every species watching the conflict. Yet to continue assembling an invasion force while human raiders systematically dismantled their military infrastructure would be strategic suicide. How long would it take to mobilize our full military strength? Rakstar asked. Not the forces allocated for the Earth assault, but every warship the Imperium can field. Vex Nar consulted his data tablet. Supreme Counselor, if we recall all expeditionary forces, garrison fleets, and reserve formations, we could assemble approximately 1,500 warships within 2 months. However, this would leave our subject worlds virtually undefended and could trigger revolts among the species we have conquered. Then we face a choice, Rakstar said quietly. We can continue our expansion and risk being bled to death by human raids, or we can mass our forces for one overwhelming assault that will break their capability to resist. If we commit everything to destroying Earth and the core human colonies, we eliminate the threat permanently. The subject worlds will have to be managed with political means rather than military garrison during the campaign, but the risk may be acceptable if it ends the human threat decisively. He turned to face Vex and AR directly. Prepare the orders. We will gather every ship, every warrior, every weapon the Imperium possesses. In 2 months, we will launch the largest military operation in Zenthari history. We will destroy Earth and prove that the Imperium cannot be challenged by any species, no matter how clever their tactics. As Counselor Vex and AR departed to execute the orders, Supreme Counselor Raxstar stood alone in the council chamber, looking at the banners of conquered species that decorated the walls. Soon, he thought, a human banner would join them, a memorial to the species that had dared to resist and paid the ultimate price. The Zenthari would show the galaxy that tactical cleverness could not overcome overwhelming force applied without restraint or mercy. Humanity would learn what every other species had learned: the Zenthari Imperium did not lose wars. They simply escalated until their enemies were broken completely. But in the depths of space, aboard dozens of black ships that moved unseen through Zenthari territory, human commanders and crews prepared for the next phase of operations. They had studied their enemy, learned their patterns, and identified their weaknesses. The Zenthari were massing their forces for one decisive blow, exactly as human strategists had predicted. And when that massive fleet gathered in one location, concentrated and vulnerable, humanity would spring its largest trap yet. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when an ancient warrior species met a young civilization that had refined violence into an art form over thousands of years of fighting itself. And the lesson would be taught in fire and blood, in the cold mathematics of orbital mechanics and weapons-grade physics, in the ultimate expression of humanity's oldest truth: when pushed to the edge, humans do not surrender, they push back harder than anyone expects, and they do not stop until their enemies understand that humanity refuses to be prey.